what is happening at Intel and where is all the optimism coming from? Let's start with advanced packaging, because that's where the crux of this discussion lies. We know Intel traditionally fits into that IDM segment there, the purple bar, but they now do have some external customers as a foundry business. And the Intel 18A wafer manufacturing line is finally making a bit of progress. But advanced packaging is actually what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah. And just a reminder, we do have an advanced packaging equipment provider list, stock index list on the research dashboard under the supply chains tab.
Catching up was never going to happen for Intel.
On the wafer development.
That's been the crux of our argument here at Chipstock Investor the entire time.
Not how technology works.
Not at all how tech works. But there is a narrow opening on the advanced packaging side that was actually one of our points all the way back in 2022. And so we're not going to be discussing Intel's financials on this presentation. I think everyone has heard us talk about it enough, but we're going to talk a little bit more about the tech. So here's a couple of slides on terminology. We're talking about data center networking, which is what we like to call the switches and routers, is like the freeway interchange on-ramp and off system. And so what we're discussing specifically in this episode is, what about the rest of the networking? What about surface city streets, not just the on-ramps and off-ramps to a highway?
Yeah, these are the smaller chip-to-chip interconnects that advanced packaging has to deal with. Primarily, we're going to talk about these two competing technologies. Chip on wafer on substrate, CoWoS from TSMC. That's one of their advanced packaging process families. Think of this as the grid of surface streets within a city. If you live in a modern city, it's probably like a square grid. Think of it like that. Your local transit that you take most often from your home to the market, and you're going block to block, street to street.
That's different from this other technology, Intel's EMIB, or Embedded Multi-Die Interconnect Bridge. It's a mouthful. This is more like a main street or a direct tunnel or bridge between locations.
Yeah, in fact, they do call it a bridge. We like to expand it just because of our analogies that we've used all along. Let's talk about it being maybe more like a thoroughfare, a quicker, not a highway or a freeway, but a quicker way to get directly home to work or home to the market or whatever.
Okay, more terminology for you. The interposer, the redistribution layer, and the local silicon interconnect. Let's take a look at those. We've got pictures.
Oh my God, this is not the picture that we wanted. This is terrible. It's a schematic. What is this?
Looks like an engineering picture to me. This is TSMC's technology, and there's 3 different versions: CoWoS-S, R, and L on the bottom. The S is very complex to manufacture and not super efficient. There's a slab of silicon between the chips and the substrate. So this is more like that block by block, street by street, getting to the market. How is that different from R with the RDL interposer?
There's still an interposer in there, sandwiched in between the substrate or the circuit board and the chips on top. In this case, they have a logic and HBM pictured. And what they do is on the chips, they add this RDL layer with very small, very dense interconnects that helps with the routing to the interposer. And it helps simplify the manufacture of the interposer. So think of this as a partial commute block by block, and then you jump on a main road and then you get there a little bit quicker.
That's great. What about CoWoS-L? So this is with RDL, which is redistribution layer. And then it also has the LSI, the local silicon interconnect, which is a bridge.
Yeah, a bridge or a tunnel even. Maybe you're the type of person that has money to burn and you're like, I want a personal tunnel from my garage to the office or to the market. And you call up Elon Musk's Boring Company and you make it happen. There's still an interposer there. There's still RDLs, but these little bridges, the little LSI, just helps increase the efficiency because you have a direct link in the schematic from the HBM to the logic chip, like the GPU or the XPU. So you have that more direct path for the data to travel without having to go through the interposer.
This one's a little bit closer to Intel's EMIB technology.
Exactly.
So let's look at that. MIB, the metal insulator, metal capacitor, or just simply M, which is embedded within the EMIB bridge to help with power delivery. There's the TSVs, the through silicon vias, which are just T's on the next slide that we'll show you. Added TSVs with MIM within the EMIB for better vertical power and data delivery.
Don't worry, we have more pictures to help
Yeah.
simplify this.
Okay, and then there's the Foveros.
Which is Greek. Fun fact for you, Foveros, in modern Greek anyways, means awesome or amazing.
Intel's version of 2.5 or 3D packaging. Okay, let's look at it. Pictures are better. Wait a minute, Intel.
Yeah, there's two versions of EMIB now. EMIB, we're coming up on a decade of mass production. They announced EMIB-M and EMIB-T, which are ramping up production. As Casey said, the M and the T add some extra little tiny components within that bridge. But what we're looking at here is this EMIB bridge that's actually embedded directly into the substrate, into the circuit board. There's no silicon interposer sandwiched in between the chips and the PCB, like with TSMC solution. One of the reasons Intel can do this is they actually have their own internal OSAT, a semiconductor assembly and test. They also partner with companies like Amkor too, but in New Mexico, for example, they get the circuit boards from, let's say, a company like iBiden in Japan. They carve out the little channel directly in the circuit board, construct the EMIB device, and then can stack the chips on top of it. That can solve a lot of problems with manufacturing, complexity of operating the device once it's finished. And then you can also layer on Foveros now on top of that, the 3D stacking of chips, because the substrate is there. You don't have this interposer, and now you're not trying to go 4 or 5 chiplets high, you're only going 2 or 3 high. So they can do some nifty things here. And then, of course, we have Foveros Direct 3D, which competes with a different advanced packaging technology, but it's more of a copper direct bonding, chip-to-chip bonding to an active die underneath. We won't go there today, but EMIB, and then also Foveros on top of that, is one of the reasons Intel has caught this tailwind of optimism as of the last 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, this is why this is important for Intel, is because there could be a door opening and they're wedging their foot in there, kicking the doors off here.
Could be.
Could be. But Nvidia owns the training market. There's essentially no one else, and it uses up most of TSMC's capacity in advanced packaging with the CoWoS technology. And so here we go. This is an opportunity for diversification with Intel.
Yeah, and especially because when you move to AI inference, you have so many different solutions that are possible to solve the AI inference engineering problems. And so maybe you don't even need CoWoS and all the complexity that goes with that. Leave that for NVIDIA and its AI training systems. For AI inference, hey, we have more options here. And maybe Intel's EMIB is a fantastic way to go. This is one of the reasons why Intel has announced some agreements with, for example, Google and its TPUs, possibly getting manufactured using processes like these. Simplified advanced packaging to get the HBM really close to those TPUs and ultimately increase performance, perhaps even reduce cost and complexity and ongoing operating costs of that infrastructure. So potentially good thing for Intel. The door's been cracked open. Now, because the stock has run up so much, they have to execute on that. The financials have to catch up and match for further upside. But that's essentially one of the big things that has happened is EMIB, and maybe you've even seen this talked about as of late as being one of the key drivers for the company.
I think we've covered pretty much everything on this slide. Maybe the only thing that we didn't mention is how much investment has been placed in Intel by the US government and Nvidia to shore up the balance sheet, extend their longevity, their runway to make this work.
We did a blog and a video about being wrong on Intel for that reason primarily a few weeks ago. Yeah, I mean, my investing experience starting very close to 2008, 2009, and government involvement in my investments definitely has tainted my outlook on what I want to own.
This time it's different.
But this time it's actually been different.
There's been a structural change.
Yes, and for good reason. 2008, 2009 was a response to an economic crisis. The US investing this time around is geopolitical and strategic in nature, trying to get manufacturing back in the US or other key supply chain partners. Okay, let's continue to round this out here.
Yeah, and I think this is important because we're bringing up a new piece of tech and it makes us feel good because we see something new and exciting. But this is one of the things that could perhaps taint our view of our investments, because As this bull market ages, more companies join in. There's more tech analysis on what layer we're in and what layer is going to be next. But the most important thing is allocation.
Yeah, and that gets more important as the bull market ages. When we started in 2022, 2023, we talked about the tech all the time and talked less about valuations and portfolio diversification for a couple of reasons. There were only a limited number of companies participating in the early days of the bull market, Nvidia primarily. But as the bull market expands, more companies participate. Talking about the tech is no longer quite as important because so many companies are participating in it now. There's no longer an edge in doing supply chain choke points and bottlenecks and who harbors a specific niche. As the bull market ages, you need to study and focus on what you can control the most, your proper portfolio construction and diversification, developing a good risk management strategy, and then also, once you build all that out, monitoring company health, making sure the companies that you own actually have sustainable long-term profit growth capabilities. That'll be important. If there's a downturn or, God forbid, eventually a bear market, they happen every roughly on average 5 to 10 years. Let's call it 7 to 8 on average. Also, the balance sheet health. Who is blowing up their balance sheet to try to capture low quality growth as the bull market ages? Really important because you don't want to be holding companies that are eventually going to go bankrupt during some sort of financial shock or event. And so that becomes more important as the bull market ages, which is why we're bringing this up again, talking about tech layers and who has the best tech. It's just the bull market is expanding. You can expect more companies to join in on this. Let's kind of keep a level head. Radical moderation is the aim. And let's be diligent and keep a close eye on valuations. And that especially can be another signal, another trigger. If you start to see companies that are pricing in way too much future growth at way too high of a rate, those can be, I'm not going to say signs of a bubble because bubbles are very hard to predict in the moment, but it can be a sign of possibly your portfolio getting out of whack and not being properly aligned to actual reality, real expectations, modest, reasonable expectations.